Applejack looked to the horizon. Under different circumstances, she would have been wistful. Even at the town hall, muffled booms and reverberated cracks could be heard all the way from the wall. Just the thought of how far away she was from the action made her gut wrench. "Please, darling, I understand you have nothing else, but surely an entire wheelbarrow full of clocks—" "No, I understand that they're valuable. I said necessary to survive." Of course, Big Mac would have none of it. "These ponies see you as a leader," he had said, "and leaders need to lead. If the resistance doesn't get here in time, then you'll have to be the one to bring them to the surface. If necessary, you'll be the last line of defense." Listening to his reasoning was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. "Well, I'll admit that I've taken a liking to them recently, but that's not— No, I most certainly not— Well, then who's going to carry them, my dear? A cart won't fit through the tunnel." So she'd said her goodbyes, giving her brother a hug, and let other ponies do the fighting for her. Her whole body tense with her desire to hit something, and she found herself not caring over much what it was. "I'm letting them die for a lie. A darned lie. But Big Macintosh. But they wouldn't understand. They'd have nothing to fight for. Half of them would desert to join the evacuees. So at least this way they had a chance. If by they you mean we. Just take the gears. We can make— Yes, I'm exceptionally aware of how hard it is to find quality wood these days. Darling, if you try to drag these clocks up the escape tunnel before a single one of the other ponies, I swear to Celestia I will burn the lot of them. And that's my last word on the matter." Applejack rolled her eyes, perking her ears away from the argument. Before her, milling about haphazardly, every pony that wasn't fighting on the wall or bedridden at the hospital was gathered in the town square. Rarity had pulled out the call to be ready for evacuation, but what exactly that meant depended on the listener. As Applejack looked around, she saw everything from carts to clocks, to hats to barrels, next to the huddled ponies, terrified of starting a new life with literally nothing yet again. One pony caught her eye, however, a lanky fellow that Applejack recognized from the old days in Ponyville. He didn't appear to have any carts or crates or even saddlebags over his back. Curious, Applejack made her way over. "Howdy, sir. How are you making out the preparations so far?" The lanky pony sat down on his haunches, looking smugly nonchalant. "I'm a mite annoyed, I suppose, but nothing too bothersome. If our boys down at the wall are still fighting by now, they ain't gonna go down anytime soon, the way I figure." Applejack smiled, glad to find someone with their head still on their shoulders. The tall colt continued. "The way I see it, they can hold out as long as they need to. Easy peasy. When the resistance shows up, behind those unicorns, they'll surrender quicker than a cat in a henhouse. Hey, you right there, miss?" Applejack imagined that she had turned politely away, and that she certainly didn't run out of sight. She might have hurried, sure, but her sudden sickness demanded it. Once she was inside the town hall proper, she collapsed into a damaged chair and tried to calm her mind. How can I tell them now? How can I tell them and take what little they have left? It would be downright cruel. I want to tell them. I know I do. But I can't. Just like I can't beyond that wall, even though that's what's right. Helping these folk is more important. Her resolve settled her stomach a bit, but it still feels like I had to swallow a rock. I can't tell them. Not yet. Twilight will understand. Fire at will. Snap could barely hear his sister over the roar of destructive magic, and the order became louder as the order was taken up. Looking out the window on the third floor of the guardhouse, he could see only an expanding dust cloud, the shapes of their besiegers long lost. Only the screams let him know that any targets remained. He gathered his strength and loosed it through his horn, equal parts hope and desperation. Crackle was next to him, a moment later, her uniform spotless as she fired her own blast of magic. Snap focused his barrage again, all the tension and near panic following out of him with every attack. The waiting had been bad. Not knowing if their magic would return in time had been worse. But now the unicorns were in the fighting, and everything demanded on them crushing their attackers before they could regroup. The guardhouse that they were encamped in was isolated, overlooked by the enemy only because it had been too far away from the fighting to actually be garrisoned by rock throwers. And if the enemy turned their attention on them in force, they would be overwhelmed. There were no more commands from his sister. They all knew that what was at stake and what needed to be done. Snap saw movement in the dust cloud and fired at it automatically, his eyes following his shot. He saw it hit the shape and explode, and he fired blindly as fast as his strength would allow, peppering the battlefield in desperate flames. He caught movement again, another shape charging through the dust clouds. No, it was the same pony, closer now. He fired again, and saw another bolt arc towards him as well. They exploded, but the dark figure leapt from the flames almost as soon as they enveloped him. "Sis," he said, a tinge of panic returning to his voice. Had it ever left? "I see it too," was the only reply. The shape was illuminated by the explosions around it, revealing the shape of a squat but hefty pony moving quickly. Too quickly. Something's wrong, he realized, taking a step back from the window. "We hit it. It's dead. How does it move so fast?" The strange pony's horn lit up, but nothing fired from it. Instead, the space between Snap and the eerie figure seemed to glow with black and blue, with the colors of midnight and fear. The building rumbled, and Snap realized the pony wasn't firing. It was enveloping the entire building in magic. The rumbling abruptly increased, and Snap looked to his sister's wide eyes. His last thought was that the ceiling was lower than he remembered. Something's wrong, Red thought, a hoof whizzing another stone into the darkness. It had been some time since he had heard a resounding scream, but the blast of magic from the guardhouse had also ceased. The dust in the air choked his lungs as he gasped, his body struggling for fuel as he heaved rock after rock into the void ahead of him. "Hold fire!" Red dropped the next rock before the last word was out of Big Mac's mouth. Though he panted and heaved, his eyes scanned the darkness restlessly from atop the wall. Had they won? No. Something is wrong. The dust cleared slowly and silently as he watched. Seconds became minutes as he blinked dirt from his eyes. His breathing slowly returned to him. And then something moved in the darkness. "Mac!" he grunted, stone in hand. A larger rock flew over his head, arcing toward the figure approaching them. Red heard a thud, but he could still make something out in the dust. A moment later he could see movement, and then he could make out the shapes of legs carrying a large body directly towards the wall. Red briefly wondered whether the pony was mad, charging the wall by himself, but his stomach wound itself into an even tighter knot. Something was wrong. Something was downright unnatural about what approached them now. Big Mac was shouting orders down below him. "Pop, set up a signal again. Don't let our forces let up on the assault. Red, take him down." Red heaved and heard his stone make contact. He didn't even try to deflect it. The soldier kept charging. The soldier's horn flared and Red ducked reflexively. His eyes widened as the wall beneath him began to glow, and by instinct he half jumped, half slid down the wall towards his friends. Something is wrong. He tried to yell, but by then it was obvious. As soon as his hooves hit the ground, he was bracing himself against the wall. Big Mac and the handful of defenders left threw themselves against it in quick succession, pushing back against the wall magic that enveloped the wall. The aura washed harmlessly around Red's shoulder, yet his fur seemed to stand on end wherever it touched. The wall groaned, and Red redoubled his efforts, solid earth grinding beneath his hooves as he heaved against the wall. It was ludicrous that one unicorn could pose any sort of threat to the behemoth of a structure. Not when it had weathered hundreds of magical bolts already, but such logic wasn't helping the uneasy feeling in his gut. Red heaved again, and the wall groaned in protest. He redoubled his strength when he heard the ominous creaking of stone on stone. The wall before him began to give way. It tilted forward. "Oh, fuck. No! Stop!" he shouted, jumping away from the wall. "They aren't pushing. They're pulling. We're helping them pull it over the wall." There was silence for a moment, as the other defenders realized what was happening. Big Mac stepped back, uncertainty flashing across his face, but it was too late. With a grinding, scraping sigh, the top of the wall swung forward, paused, and followed its new center of gravity forward. The wall didn't simply tumble over, constructed as it was of 100 pieces of rubble and reinforced debris. Boulders that had been packed tight with repeated magical blasts no longer rested on each other, and began to fall one by one. There was no climactic clash or plume of dust sent skyward, just a landslide that quickly grew and then receded. The wall had slumped forward, now more horizontal than vertical, and nothing but a mound of rubble the height of a normal pony stood between the defenders and the besiegers. For Red, everything happened at once. A soldier peered warily over the rubble and was immediately met with a rock to the jaw. But a turquoise ray of magic knocked the defender who had thrown it off his feet. Big Mac yelled something to Pop, who nodded and fired a signal skyward. The flare burst, green fading to red like a firework from Red's childhood. But somewhere Red registered the flare as the evacuation signal. Another blast of green magic zipped past Red's head, and when he followed it, the remaining half of Pop was violently smoking on the ground. Panic receded as he wrestled control of his body back. The other defenders were dead. Big Mac was surrounded by 3 unicorns, but 2 others lay dead on his feet. One of Red's legs was numb from the flank down, and he was grateful that his adrenaline rush had blocked out the pain of whatever had hit him. He charged, limping as he was to Big Mac's aid, crashing into a unicorn from behind and sending him off the bridge to the rocks a few meters below. Another soon joined him, and the last crumpled beneath Big Mac's blows when the Red's giant hoof landed on his neck. But even as the last one twitched and died, more scrambled over the rubble. In their midst came a barrel of legs, his torso as thick as Big Mac's, though not so tall. Red recognized the black and blue magic that shot from his horn, vaporizing the stone in front of Big Mac. "Red," Big Mac began. "The town ponies." "I'm not leaving," Red interrupted. "The signal went off. We hold the wall." Big Mac grunted. Red liked to believe that he had smiled at that, but he never knew for sure. The soldiers never paused, nor waited for an order from their leader, simply swarming down the rubble pile on exhausted and unsteady limbs. Red recognized desperation in their eyes. No pony would flee from this fight. The general swam in a haze of red and black. Something moved his limbs for him, stepping sure-footedly over the rubble. Exhaustion tugged at him, the pain of a failing body registering on his mind, but something kept him sprinting forward. He hadn't stopped moving in. He didn't know for how long. He remembered something about his friends, dust and lights and death, and then some pony had taken over for him. He was relieved, in a way, except that he couldn't just lay down. Every movement was as exhausting as if he had made it himself, leaving him without any energy to even think. Ahead of him, the red haze coincided into 2 boulders. No, earth ponies. They moved side by side, but the general moved with them. Other shapes swarmed towards them from behind. Unimportant shapes. Survivors. and the two red monoliths lashed out. Magic flared, flesh burned, and the general turned his attention from the scene in front of him, receding to the plan he had once registered as his pounding head. Blood. He registered as magic sliced through the front leg of the lesser red giant. Death, he added, as the other pony leapt forward, crushing a soldier into the dirt. The scenes gave him strength, fueled his focus, and the general's attention came back to the fight. As easy as thought, he enveloped the two red earth ponies in magic, wheeling them into the air. He grunted in confusion when they moved only a few centimeters forward, their hooves seemingly glued to the earth. A stone the size of a hoof struck him, blinding an eye and breaking his concentration, but causing no more pain. His entire world was already pain. Nothing else could add to that. He was moving forward again, the two ponies turning their attention fully on him. The larger one said something, and he felt his jaw move and his throat reverberate. Had he said something back? He tried to focus, to hear what he had said, but it was so hard, and there was so much pain. "You had your chance," something echoed in his head, and then he was falling, the scene fading as he was pushed into the back corner of his mind, his way back blocked by indescribable agony. "Come then," Big Mac said, not wanting to waste words on the monster in front of him. Fur that was either dark gray or black stood on either end beneath colorless black armor, seemingly crawling across the skin of the colt in front of him. It looked like it would crumple neatly beneath his hooves. "I see your death," the unicorn said, his voice rough and jarring, as if he was unused to words. And then he was firing. Big Mac braced himself, drawing strength from the stones of the bridge beneath him. Dark blue magic lanced towards him from the unicorn, crashing into him like an icicle and sapping his strength. But he weathered the blows with the strength of a mountain. Even when the bolt of magic passed, the numbing effect remained, and Big Mac's first step forward cost more of his strength than he would have wanted to admit. The unicorns next to the barrel-chested monster stood arrayed like a firing squad, heads lowered and horns pointed at the final two defenders. For a brief moment, Big Mac hoped that they would stay out of the fight until their commander ordered them otherwise. Even as the thought passed his mind, though, their horns lit up in a pantheon of colors, launching a rainbow of fire at him a moment later. Big Mac ducked his head and set his hooves, refusing to give an inch under their onslaught. The pain was incredible, flames washing over him like a current and searing away coat and mane and flesh. The barrage must have lasted less than a moment, yet afterwards it took all of Big Mac's strength to not fall to a knee. His nostrils were filled with the smell of charred meat, and his eyes were blinded, perhaps permanently, with the blinding light. Hoofsteps echoed off to his side, and Big Mac knew that Red had fared better than him. Some pony let out a high-pitched scream, followed by a gurgle of blood as another pony's swear was cut off mid-cuss. Big Mac mustered what strength he had to shamble blindly forward into a grim parody of a charge, willing his eyesight to return before he limped right past the attackers. His vision swam with grays and whites, light searing into his eyes, but something darker and more condensed into shape in front of him, just as Big Mac leapt. He felt himself land on a pony near him, nearly as big as him, his flesh seeming to crawl and wither beneath Big Mac's weight. Rather than going flying as Big Mac had expected, the other pony grunted and sagged under Big Mac's weight, but weathered the crushing mass as well as any earth pony. His body seemed to sap the heat from Big Mac's skin in moments. There was a brief flash, and a wave of force seemed to pass through Big Mac, lifting and throwing him back to the unicorn. He twisted in the air, trying desperately to turn and see where he was headed, but he only succeeded in landing heavily on his side, skidding a few feet across the gravel-strewn bridge before coming to a halt. He lifted his head as best he could, his flagging strength would allow, watching helplessly as red rose into the air, his body engulfed in a cloud of black and blue magic. Big Mac struggled to his hooves, grunting and panting with every exertion. The cold that seemed to pierce his body in rivets left muscles unresponsive, while contrasting the lingering smell of burning mane. But Big Mac rose all the same. With all the weight and stubbornness of a mountain, he began a final, lumbering charge. The leader of the unicorns turned his gaze towards Big Mac, casually flicking his head and sending red soaring off the bridge. Even though the tunnel vision of his charge, Big Mac registered the stab of regret at the casual disposal of his friend. The bridge quaked beneath every hoofbeat, reverberating to the beat of his pounding heart as blood and fury pumped through the gargantuan pony. His eyes filled with black and blue magic of the unicorn as it tried to lift him into the air, but the bridge held on to its defender as surely as the defender guarded the bridge, and Big Mac lumbered ever closer. The magic abruptly disappeared, reforming instantly beneath his hooves. But he was too close now. He could see alarm raising in the unicorn's one good eye, the other openly weeping blood from an earlier wound, and Big Mac lowered his head and jumped, or tried to. As his hooves tensed beneath him, there was an abrupt crack in the stone beneath him. He pushed off the ground to leap, but found himself pushing only air, while the brick, mortar, and strength of the bridge crumbled into rocks and river below. His eyes never strayed from the unicorns as he fell, slamming into the edge of the gap hard enough to break his jaw, and tumbling the rest of the way down. The shock of the cold of the water knocked what breath he had left, and he reflexively gasped in a lungful of blood-choked river. His strength and anger ebbed away with the river, the rubble blocking the light from above as it settled around him. Big Mac's last moments were not of fury nor peace, but confusion. We held for so long. Where's the resistance? Sis, where? Petty Sergeant Lucent Starglow had been busy composing his tale of epic victory when he chanced upon the 6 civilians. In his version of the story, he had been one of the first of Her Royal Majesty's soldiers to brave the wall, slaying 4 rebel earth ponies the size of houses. It had been his own magic that had first begun burning down the rebel base. In actuality, he had been one of the first unicorns to survive going over the wall. He had even seen the giant red earth pony get swallowed up by the river as he followed his general's coattails. Seeing as every pony else that had gone ahead of him was dead, however, made him the de facto first pony into the breach. One of the 2 in front of him whimpered, drawing a frown from Lucent. He knew Private Smallhorn, a ridiculous name given his subordinate's size, was looking to him for orders. Smallhorn had been more combat experience, and was the only other unicorn in the squad to survive the assault on the wall, but his rank still made him subordinate to the brass-like Lucent. Lucent shrugged. He didn't particularly like killing civilians, but orders were orders. In his tale, he would say that they had swung downriver to scout out any fleeing defenders and avoid civilian casualties. And at least one of those was true. It had just been bad luck that one of these evacuees had occurred along the way. He let the magic of his horn gather as he stared the group down. There was at least one family, and probably their neighbors. The coat standing in front of the children at least looked as though he might have been a defender, ignoring the obvious limp in one leg. He seemed stubborn enough, at least. His eyes remained defiant, as every pony else's widened in fear. The fear made Lucent smile a bit. 2 members of his squad had died screaming, and no small part of him wanted revenge. "Sir!" Lucent whirled around and faced a large, wet, smelly mass of red fur. He looked up, the magic fading from his horn as his eyes widened. A large, wet hoof rested on his head as Lucent pissed himself in fear. To his credit, the red behemoth never smiled as he pulled his and Smallhorn's heads together. Red nodded to the towns-ponies after the bodies collapsed, but no consolation to offer the crying fillies. They would remember that for the rest of their lives, he was sure, but unless they all stayed focused, that would be gruesomely short. Red blinked, lost track of time, and found himself further south of the town, striking inland, a gaggle of towns-ponies at his back. To his right, flame was spreading throughout the houses of the town, even the stone buildings having their thatched roofs burned into smoke and ash. He faded out and in again, realized that he certainly had a concussion, and was past the town. It wasn't until he had almost arrived that he knew where he was going. A throng of ponies loomed ahead of him, loud despite their best efforts as they tried to squeeze into a single door in the cavern wall. His group of survivors ran ahead of him, thanking him profusely as they passed and rejoining their loved ones. Two ponies near the rear of the larger group turned and trotted towards him, the glow of the town's fires illuminating their faces of Mayor Rarity and Big Mac's sister. "I remember you," Rarity said. "Foreman Red." She hesitated a moment. "Just Red now, I suppose." "You're from the wall. Are there survivors?" The orange pony who Red now remembered as Applejack leaned forward, one hoof half raised in anticipation. "My brother, Big Macintosh. Is he okay?" Red didn't look her in the eyes, but through either exhaustion or his concussion, he had no filter to soften the blow. "I didn't see him die," he said, "but no unicorn would have crossed that bridge while he lived. I'm sorry. We held as long as we could, but the resistance never arrived. The wall fell as soon as the evacuation signal was sent." His voice held none of the sympathy of his words. These ponies hadn't watched their hopes die, one friend at a time. The two fillies looked at each other. "I'm sorry," Rarity began. Just then there was a clap of thunder, deafeningly close. Bright white flashing over the towns-ponies turned refugees. "Lightning," Applejack muttered, her face dazed and distant. "Twilight," Rarity supplied. "It must be. Come on, dear. We must be there or all is lost." She turned to Red, the rising flames from the town illuminating the desperation in her eyes. "Red, you've been through so much, but please, do us one last service. Make sure these ponies escape, safely, and guard them for as long as you need to." Red nodded, the throbbing in his head making him feel disconnected with reality. He hadn't thought about it. He might not have surely been sure about his ability to fight any pony like this, but he knew it wasn't safe to rest yet. Maybe on the surface, he could catch some sleep. He stumbled through the iron door to the safe house, the sick, young, or enfeebled refugees making way for him. He climbed the ladder that had been erected to the natural vent of the ceiling, crawling on all fours through the cramped tunnel. All the while, his head, limbs, and battered body demanded that he rest. And suddenly he was outside, on the dirt, the stars shining brighter than he had ever noticed before. Though that was more than likely his concussion. He was struck by the realization that the battle had lasted throughout the entire day, that was the only survivor of the fighting, and that many of his friends were dead. He wanted to laugh, and vomit, and sleep, all at once. In the end, he settled on a slightly hysteric smile. He looked around at the ponies around him, his smile fading as he noticed the scores of uniformed ponies that had been waiting for him.